and welcome to the next episode of DDR, a podcast all about your favorite Drow, Drizzt Do'Urden. My name is Justin, and in this episode, we'll be diving deep into part 4 of Sojourn, titled Resolutions, discussing all of our favorite plot points, characters, and more.
And my name is Jeffrey. Of course, as you may have heard by now, we're pretty big fans of Dungeons & Dragons. So we're also going to be discussing the chapters and how parts of them relate to the tabletop game.
Following along with the show is easy. Just grab a copy of the book, read the next part of the book, and tune in every week. But remember, we want to hear your thoughts too. You can share those with us at drizztdoneright@gmail.com.
Or, better yet, you can always be part of the ongoing discussion on our very own Drizzt Done Right Discord.
Nice.
The Discord invitation is linked in the podcast description, and it's a place where listeners of the show can gather and get to know one another, or take a deep dive beyond the pages with some of the different sections that we have. Do you want to share some fan art that blows your mind? We got a spot for that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to talk about spoilers from book 28 in the Drizzt stories? Well, we got a place for that too.
Yep.
So feel free, just click that link in the episode discussion and come on into the Discord.
Absolutely. Well, Jeffrey.
Yes.
We have to get real with our audience here. They're not going to get this for a couple weeks yet. They're not going to get this video for a few weeks because we didn't release episodes, 0, 1, 2, or 3 yet. This is episode 4. But it's been a solid, 4 months since we've recorded part
Something
3?
like that, yeah. At least right around January, maybe December.
Yeah, I think it was like November because when I was editing the videos, I was talking about my MetaQuest 3, and it's like, oh man, I've had that for a long time. But so our apologies. I'll probably have to have a disclaimer before this video or something. But if I do, you already heard that. Jeffrey, how are you doing lately?
Good. The fun thing about recording these and putting them out is as we get new listeners, they're going to have no idea there's any gap between part 3,
exactly.
4,
Yeah.
5. But no, I mean, I've been pretty good. Just kind of juggling, trying to keep everything intact, and
I hear that.
just really enjoying each day going forward. It was
good.
fun for the listeners. We got to go see Dune on the big screen,
Dune
giant
2,
IMAX.
Yeah, awesome.
They
So cool.
sadly did not have the popcorn bucket.
They didn't.
I would have totally
I
got
got
one of those.
popcorn.
I didn't get popcorn, but they didn't have the cool sandworm bucket.
Yeah. Oh,
But,
well. Was a very
So
cool
what
movie, though.
What have you been up to in the the passing 4 months, or to the new listeners who are just clicking play since last episode?
Yeah, I mean, work really picked up. At one point, I had the flu. At one point, I had COVID. It's been a crazy few months here. Really, I'm just trying to get by. But it's nice to finally be able to find some time to sit down and get back into this. I'm really excited. And
It was kind of
reading,
crazy because I had the book notated and marked up, and I was ready to go.
Right.
And then it's just like this the great gap there between parts 3 and 4.
It'll happen.
Yeah. And it's just, I was like, oh, so when we got a chance to come back to it, it was nice because, like I said, I already had the notes, and it's just kind of like getting right back on into the roll of things.
Yeah, nice. Awesome. Well, we could talk all day about what happened within the past 4 or 5 months, but we have a show to do here. So let's go ahead and jump right in to the insight check.
The insight check is that part where we start. Oh no, we're gonna have to cut that out. I don't have. Shucks. Anywho,
Sorry, no problem.
I was like, man, I'll just freestyle it. No, I will not.
The insight check is the part where we talk about something.
The insight check. Yeah. Ready?
Yep.
I'll give you the hand signal so you can see it in the thing.
Oh.
This insight check, part 4, is called Resolutions. And as we begin part 4, we find Drizzt is contemplating his journey through life as he seeks to define good and evil, which is something that a lot of people, I think, can relate to, right? Because it's been postulated by some of our greatest philosophers. I mean, does the world around us seem to follow any sort of universal rules? Is there any purpose to life? Yeah, I'm sure that you've ruminated for yourself, right?
No, totally.
For Drow, it's ambition, the attainment of rank and material gain. And Montolio, he was able to confirm to Drizzt that just because he's Drow doesn't mean that he shares the same ambition.
Hmm.
The following, at least in my Kindle, is underlined or highlighted about 500 times. And it says, I've learned that the ambition of those who follow selfish precepts is no more than a chaotic waste, a finite gain that must be followed by infinite loss. For there is indeed harmony in the universe, a concordant singing of common weal. To join that song, one must find inner harmony, must find the notes that ring true. And Drizzt finishes by reminding us one more truth: evil creatures cannot sing. I
It's
loved that part.
amazing.
It really kind of made me chuckle because it's like that part where you just kind of stick it to him a little bit, like, oh,
Yeah.
they can't sing
Uh
anyway.
huh.
But for me, I love the way that this is posed, right? Because Drizzt comes from such a dark and just dangerous beginning, but ultimately at this point has come to believe that the world is full of beauty and wonder as well. Like,
Hmm.
if this world around us is the most joyous song ever written, then the purpose of life is to be a note in that chorus, adding to the beauty for all to behold. I just thought that was really kind of cool.
Yeah, and that's definitely what the way that he felt at the beginning of this chapter. But it's really neat to see how he changed as the chapter at the beginning of this part of the book. It's neat to
Right.
see how he changed throughout this part.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much right in chapter 16, he starts to like, oh, gods, huh. And that's really neat. Cool. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to the next part of this episode. Get into the drizzt of it. The Drizzt is the part of the show where we take a look at the next part of the book and we give you the Drizzt of it. And let me tell you what, this one, wow, amazing, amazing. I'll go as quickly as I can, but there's so much in this. So, part 4 is titled Resolutions, and we start out with chapter 16, titled Of Gods and Purpose. It starts with a conversation between Montolio and Drizzt. And within this conversation, Montolio disclosed his entire backstory to Drizzt. We found out that Montolio gave his life as a ranger to Mieliki, which is really hard to spell. But yeah, he gave his life to Mieliki at an early age. He had a teacher named Dillamond, who was a highly skilled ranger that never missed with her bow, not once in 10,000 shots, he said, which is like insane.
It seems like hyperbole, right? And that would kind of fit with Montolio's nature to just
That's
tweak things a little.
right.
But, I mean, definitely still probably means that she's the greatest shot he's ever seen.
Yeah. But then it's like at the same time he goes into the details of how she died, and it's like, but if she never misses, but I could see like if she just gets like overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed.
Yeah. So more recently, Montolio was on a quest that led to an encounter with a red dragon. It was a red dragon, right?
Yep.
A red dragon? A red dragon.
Yep.
That pretty much killed most of his party and burned away Montolio's face. The clerics were able to restore his wounds, but they couldn't restore his sight. He went into the forest to get away from the pity that everyone had on him. And Montolio went on to talk about his god, Mieliki, which, pretty much made Drizzt pretty uncomfortable. He didn't like the
Like
idea
an
of
awkward conversation for him,
Yeah.
where it was like, eh.
He wanted nothing to do. Drizzt wanted nothing to do with any gods, especially after his dealings with Lolth, right? And Drizzt declared, "My god is my heart." And Montolio is just like, "And you have not found a name for your god yet. I mean, your heart is your god. You just don't have a name for it." So, which god fits the god that lives in Drizzt's heart? Montolio, he knows the answer. He says, if you are of like heart with Guinevere, then you follow Mieliki. And the panther apparently is a creature of Mieliki's domain. So apparently Drizzt already follows Mieliki. He just doesn't realize it.
Montolio is so crafty that in that argument, he doesn't even really leave Drizzt a way out. He's like, well, I don't know what I would call it. He goes, well, you and Guinevere share like minds. He's like,
Right.
yeah, yeah. He goes, well, Guinevere totally follows Maliki. He's like, how do you know? And he goes, she told me. Like, duh. I was like, now what's Drizzt gonna say? Well, no, Guinevere does not like the goddess of nature. Like, so that
Right.
kind of just backdoors him. He's like, okay,
Yep.
right,
Yeah.
I see your point.
Well, and he kind of opens up to it then, and he's just kind of like, all right, well, what does Miyaliki require of me then? And Montolio was like, require? Because really, like, Montolio, it's not he's not in the position to, like, be listening to Miyaliki about Drizzt. Like, that's,
Right. Well,
that's
it's also
between
a
Drizzt and
different kind of
Miyaliki.
god, right? Because Drizzt is used to Lolth, who has very specific demands of all her followers.
Right.
And so he thinks that there must be some cardboard cutout again of like, okay, well then what's Maliki want? What do I got to do to go over here and join her club? And he's
Right.
like, no, like
Right. It's
that's
not how
between
it
you two.
works.
Not it's
Yeah.
nothing to do. Like, yeah,
Yep.
it's not. It's individualized.
Right, exactly. And so Drizzt was, after this conversation, Drizzt was just, he was left with a desire to know more, at least a small desire, right? It kind of opened up that door for him where he was just kind of like, huh, well, maybe. After that conversation, we cut over to Roddy McGristle, who is apparently on relatively, quote, good terms with the orc chieftain Grawl. Good enough
Talk
that...
about like tag team champions in the world. There, you mentioned Roddy McGristle coming in from one end and King Grawl in the other. Like, oh, that's so much mass between those two.
Totally. So Roddy was just showing up at the orc encampment with intent to deliver information that would hopefully get the orcs to do Roddy's dirty work. He wanted them to attack Mushi's Grove and kill Drizzt for him. It took a little bit of deception to convince the orcs. Grawl asked Roddy if Mushi was responsible for the death of his band of orc scouts. Roddy, of course, had no idea what he was talking about, but he responded, yeah, duh, of course he's responsible. and he went on to say, and if you don't go and kill him, he's going to come and kill you with his army of animals and dwarves and elves. Because, I mean, Grawl hates elves and dwarves more than most other creatures. So, of course, he agreed to help attack Mushi's Grove.
Like every great warmonger ever, too. He's all like, yeah, and if not, they'll come and stab you in your sleep when you're safe. And no, they're going to get you. Like, he just keeps tacking on fears.
Yep, exactly. So Grawl went, after that conversation, Grawl went alone back into his cave where Tephanis, the Quickling, and Karok, the warg, or no, he wasn't a warg, he was a winter wolf. They waited in there, and Karok agreed to help the orcs by mustering up an army of wargs. Now the tough part for Grawl. He isn't the most religious, but to appease the orc god Grumsh One-Eye, he would need to wait nearly 10 days for the new moon before he could attack. It was just kind of like a respectful way of worshiping, I guess I should say, of getting everyone on board with this. If he would just go off and start this attack without the approval of Grumsh One-Eye, then people would, or the orcs would just be like, "What are you doing?" And so
forgive me for not remembering the insides of my my highlight or my dim light, but I'm actually gonna go over this part of it, and it kind of remembers me. I don't know if I mentioned it or not, of 300. Where Leonidas had to go and ask the blessing of the fates before he was able to go lead a war or require the war party to go fight the Persians.
Right.
So he climbs up that mountain to go talk to him and get their blessing, even though he didn't really believe in it. He was just like, fine, goes up and does that.
Yeah,
it's kind of what it always reminded me of. He's like, Growl's trying to find a way to appease that so that he can really just get an excuse to go to war.
Right.
Like he talks about it. Mushi's animals always spooking off the caravans and alerting him. He's like, I haven't found a caravan unaware in forever. So he's really just wanting a reason to go pick this fight.
Yeah. No, I haven't seen the movie 300 in, man, I think I
Zack
saw it
Snyder.
in theaters.
Turns out I am evidently a Zack Snyder fan when I start digging into these things.
Yeah.
Like, you know what? His cinematic style evidently appeals to me.
Yeah.
Goodness.
All right. Then we jump into chapter 17 titled Outnumbered, which starts 10 days later.
Oh, wait, but you said that he was going to wait.
Yeah, so let's see what happens.
10 days.
Drizzt and Montolio are out and about in the woods as if today will be a perfectly normal day. Drizzt was about to call on Guinevere to help with the day's hunt, but Montolio advised against it, because it was a new moon last night, and the wild partying of the orcs could be heard on the wind. It would probably be best to wait to call on Guinevere, just in case. Montolio went on to describe how Hooter caught sight of a group of wargs that were in cahoots with the orcs, which is never a good sign. There's obviously trouble brewing. Yeah, so let's make sure that Guinevere is nice and rested, just in case, right? Drizzt worried about where the orcs intended to strike and wondered where the closest village was. None were closer than Maldabar, so Drizzt and Montolio sat in a long, tense pause as they both realized, pretty much at the same time, where the orc army was most likely to attack. Montolio broke... Even further past Maldabar. Montolio broke the silence. It will take them a day or two to get ready. Which is just like, oh man. Drizzt went to scout the camp the orc camp once the sun sank low. How different could it be from scouting in the Underdark? Montolio made sure that Drizzt knew that Hooter and other friends were about, and that Drizzt need only shout if he needed help. At the camp, Drizzt saw a giant and heard the snarls of wargs as he approached the camp. He climbed his way up the tree. He was suddenly surprised by an orc lookout, a sentry that was completely unaware of Drizzt. That's how quiet he was climbing that tree. Man, if I had to climb a tree, I'd be like, I'd be grunting the whole way up.
I'm just thinking of how far you would jump if you were that orc in the tree and you look down and see Drizzt's purple eyes like 2 feet away from you,
right?
Like, looking at you.
Oh man,
I'm out of the tree. Like involuntarily, I would lose my footing and fall out of that tree.
Yep. Well, lucky for the orc, he wasn't paying attention. He wasn't doing his job, or else he would have seen those eyes and he would have freaked out. But and also, lucky for the orc, Drizzt left him alone and turned his gaze to the festivities at the orc camp below instead. There he saw 2 effigies, one a dark elf and the other a mustached man. Remind you of anybody? The orcs took turns tearing into these figures. So, the orc's intent was obvious. So Drizzt made his way back to Montolio to deliver the message. But by the time Drizzt got back there, Montolio already knew that the orcs were going to attack very soon.
The orcs, evidently, their war party to get ready is a lot like a high school pep rally.
Yeah. Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Bring out a big stuffed dummy of the other mascot, beat it with a stick. Ah!
That's hilarious.
Give me a D. Give me an E. Defense.
Upon this news, Drizzt's first thought was on running and hiding, thinking that they were grossly outnumbered. But Montolio looked forward to the attack, stating, "Nothing in all the world sounds sweeter than a blade opening an orc's belly."
That's dark, Montolio.
Yeah. And besides, Grawl shouldn't be attacking when he is so grossly outnumbered, is what Montolio says. That's where the title of the chapter comes in. And nice. Yeah, Montolio's pretty cocky here. Confident, I guess.
Yeah, I mean...
Because he has a right to be.
He's been waiting for this war for a long time, as you go through this. Yeah.
Yep. Drizzt didn't have the words to reply to Montolio's jabs at Grawl, but that didn't matter. Any words that he would have had wouldn't have been able to come through his laughter. Okay, Drizzt went on to take a nap before the battle, while Montolio finished the preparations. We get a brief glimpse over at Calendil and his group of elves. They became aware of Grawl's orcs, the fact that they were on the move, not toward any caravans. It was too early in the season. There were no caravans traveling, but they were moving toward the grove. So, Calendil and his elves gathered up their longbows and set off to Montolio's aid.
Talk about like the weird dynamic, right? Like there's a gathering storm brewing of orcs and
Mm-hmm.
wargs, and then Kalendiel and his friends are all in the rush. Everybody's getting ready, and Drizzt is just napping, feet up in a hammock somewhere, catching a few
True.
Z's.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
he is so battle trained, where it's like, this is what I do. This isn't
Right.
anything to get like
Yeah. So he's just like,
anxiety about.
might as well just rest up.
Yeah,
Like,
I just found that to be really kind of like wow, it kind of shows you what kind of warrior Drizzt is, and like how
right.
he approaches
Yeah.
battle. It's just kind of
Yep.
like, get rest where you can. Tomorrow's gonna be hectic. Let's go. Everybody else is like, oh, preparation. It's last minute, everything, run.
Even Montolio.
Yeah,
Not that he's worried about it. He's just getting ready. He's getting prepared, right?
yeah.
When Drizzt awoke that afternoon, he looked up and it was a darkened, cloudy sky. And here I thought it was like, oh, like they summoned a storm to, to have them like covered in darkness as they attack. But no, it just happened to be cloudy, and Salvatore made a point of it. And Montolio was setting up traps all around the grove. It was clear that Montolio played this battle out hundreds of times over the years. He led Drizzt to a den where he kept an arsenal of hunting traps, demonstrated how they're used, basically like bear traps, right? And then Drizzt went about setting them up. And then together they set up even more traps, from tree spring-loaded tree traps, which we'll
Something
talk
like
about.
straight out of like an Acme cartoon trying to catch a roadrunner.
Right. These tree spring traps that threw knives or somehow captured them and had knives all hooked up. That was insane. Yep. To a tree trunk boat filled with brandy. That was that was very cool. And then news came by Owl, very Harry Potter of them, that Grawl and his forces were
Elizabeth
on the way.
will appreciate that when she listens to this.
That Grawl and his forces were on the way, and among them, again, like Drizzt saw, a giant. Drizzt was adamant that he wanted to draw the giant to him. Montolio could not deny Drizzt this, so he taught him a phrase that giants absolutely hate. Mangura Bakwaklak. Roughly translated, stupid blockhead.
Now, can you say it quickly, though? Because I pronounce it in my head the same way you just said it. Yep.
Mangura
But like say,
Bakwaklak. Mangura
you're trying to get.
Bakwaklak.
There you go. Yes, I was like trying to taunt that giant. Like, then go to Bakwak. Like,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you definitely have to practice that. Oh, man. Chapter 18 is the Battle of Mushi's Grove. So Drizzt and Montolio were becoming anxious of the oncoming forces. News came of warg riding orcs coming from the west. But even more disturbing to Montolio was the news of Karok, the winter wolf, leading a group of wargs from the south.
I'm so happy you're reading this, because honestly, in my head, that's like the author. Every time I read it, Kerouac. Karok. I was like, man, yeah. I was like, I don't know
Kerouac.
why.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, see, like it's not, because when you say it, Karok, right? That's I like that. I think that makes way more sense.
That's, that's the way the audiobook on Kindle reads
after it. The author, Kerouac.
So Guinevere, well, yeah. So the south, coming from the south, was very disturbing for them because they pretty much left it defenseless because it was just like a sheer cliff. But I guess he figured wargs would be able to ascend that no problem. Guinevere's response to the winter wolf told Drizzt that Karok was a particularly evil creature. Like, Guinevere knew who Karok was. So they entrusted Guinevere to delay Karok and his forces until Drizzt and Montolio had a chance to take care of Grawl's forces. Most of the rest of this chapter was just this intense, highly detailed battle. And if I were to do a play-by-play of everything, it would take forever. So here are the main dim lights.
Is this the Drizzt of the Drizzt?
This is the Drizzt of the Drizzt here. So we'll be looking at each character individually and what they did throughout the whole battle, sort of thing.
Okay. I like it.
So Drizzt had a chance. Oh man, this was tense. He had a chance to shoot at Grawl or McGristle, right? He had one bolt left. Who did he choose? He chose Grawl. But he missed. Ugh! He ignited a brandy-filled tree trunk, which just like lit up a bunch of wargs. He used fairy fire. I loved this, to get some warg-mounted orcs to drop their torches by making the orcs think that the torches like caught their hands on fire.
Yeah.
And he also taunted that giant with his newly learned phrase, to the giant's demise, with that trap that Mangora Bakwa Clock.
Yes. Now I think about it like Charlie Brown when they're like Mangora Bakwa Clock. Stupid blockhead.
So what was it? That trap with the giant. Oh, so cool. Montolio fired arrow after arrow into the orcs, which is amazing because he's blind. But then when the forces got close, what did he do? He slashed a rope that triggered the lowering of his shield from the tree branches above. His shield was then enchanted with darkness from Drizzt, so he's just walking around in this globe of darkness. And the orcs were just easy prey for him. He traveled around the battlefield, leaving a trail of orc corpses in his wake.
How terrifying that's got to be.
Right.
Like, they're already scared of the Blind Ranger. They don't know what it is, but you see this rolling death ball of darkness. Like, nothing comes out the other side,
yeah, exactly.
but butchered orc.
Exactly.
Like tree on the wood chippers, just like, oh my god.
Exactly, yeah, totally. Bluster the Bear and his pals fought orcs up around the northern entrance of the grove. Tyrannus followed along with the orcs from the north, but he was able to sneak past the bears. But he got caught by one of the hunter's traps. When he awoke, he saw his foot hanging on by the skin. He cut it off the rest of the way and made his way slowly into the woods. So, like, probably half speed from now on for poor Tyrannus.
Which is still like 3 times faster than people.
Guinevere, remember, was off fighting the wargs. I mean, she easily snapped Karok's neck, like right away, right at the beginning of the battle. It was just like, whoa, what? Like, whoa.
Right. Like, there goes Tyrannus' other friend, like, just not having a good luck of friend. Or
poor Tyrannus.
A good run of friends.
Yeah. Guinevere then led the rest of the wargs to a chasm. She was able to jump across it pretty easily. The other wargs approached the chasm cautiously because they weren't sure what they were getting up to. It was pretty dark here, right? They attacked at night. And then they were ambushed by Calendil and his party. As the orcs were scattering in all directions, Megrisel, this is toward the end of the battle then, Megrisel tried to convince Grawl to head into the battle and regroup his army. Grawl, however, knew the dangers of Bluster and his bear friends. Oh, man, and as the battle wound down, Calendil couldn't help but feel partially responsible for this attack. If he could have prevented this attack by killing Drizzt when he had the chance, he probably would have done it. So he needed to know the reason for Grawl's attack on Mushi's Grove. He set out after the fleeing orcs. Grawl and Megrisel had a falling out after Megrisel caused the desolation of Grawl's forces. Megrisel raced away from the scene, being chased by like a dozen orcs or something like that, and ran square into the blunt edge of Calendil's sword. I mean, I feel like dropped, right?
I feel like from Calendil, though, it's kind of short-sighted, right? Because he's like, well, if I'd have killed Drizzt, none of this would have happened. But Grawl was looking for any reason to get into that grove. So
right.
If not Drizzt, simply something else would have served a purpose eventually.
Right. And
you look at it from Mushi's perspective there, like, he had to be so happy because he had planned to do this by himself. And then suddenly Drizzt shows up. Like, right. Man, you talk about like the best sidekick you could ask for as a random encounter. Like,
that's a good point. Do you think Mushi would have been able to fight off these orcs without Drizzt?
No, I think Mushi was content to go down in a blaze of glory, essentially.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it would have made sense for especially what he set out to do when you talked about his backstory and everything else, that his goal was simply to take as many of them with him as he could.
Yeah. I like that. No, I agree with that. That sounds right.
Yeah. That's why I think he was like, slicing an orc's belly is the best thing I've ever heard. Like,
right.
You know what? Like, it is very much, I think, like he was just running into the fray.
Yeah. Cool. Oh, and then what was the thing that... Shoot. Right when Calendil knocks McGristle out, I should have put it in here. He says something like, "Why am I not surprised?" or something like that. I'm just... That made me chuckle.
Or it's like you again or whatever. It's
Yeah,
yeah.
All right.
Because you get from the moment we've met McGristle, he has been this person.
Yep. Calendil's just like, ugh, not again.
Yep.
So I'm like really interested to see what happens there. At least at that point, I was really interested. Let's see in chapter 19. Chapter 19, titled Separate Ways. Obviously, we know what's happening in Separate Ways, right? Tyrannus with the new companion, the yellow mutt. Is that his new companion? That's what I thought, at least at first. I'm just like, he just chose this random dog? So Tyrannus was with this random yellow mutt, and as the sun was coming up, he tied the dog to a tree, and he ran off. He went to find Roddy. All right? He found Roddy with his wrist tied to a tree. Ah, that's why. Okay, never mind. So, he tied the dog to the tree, ran off to find Roddy. He found Roddy with his hands tied behind his back at Calendil's camp. He untied Roddy.
You thought that the dog at first was Tyrannus's, but didn't...
He was saving the dog. He was saving the dog because the dog was Roddy's, right?
Right.
Yeah. Took me a while to figure that out. I mean, like, you know, within the chapter, but I'm just like, who's this dog at first?
Like, spent days mystified, but...
So, yeah, Tyrannus untied Roddy. Roddy stayed as if he was tied, right, with his hands behind his back. Tyrannus went and distracted Calendil long enough for Roddy to slam Calendil to the ground and choke him to death. What the heck, man? This book...
That was dark. When Calendil went down, I was like, oh... No. I just did not expect that right there.
Man. Like, first it was the Thistledowns.
Yep.
Like, it's just like... They just keep tacking on people. Good and bad people.
Yeah, and I mean, he's done a great job really making you care about when that happens, too. Like, when Clacker went down, you're just like,
oh, man.
Straight to the heart, right? Like, every time he goes, it's like, yeah. Calendil, you're watching him change his point of view about Drizzt. You're watching Drizzt finally find somebody that looks like him, but not like him, clearly, surface self, and find that forgiveness, maybe friendship. Nope, McGristle killed him. Like, of all ways to die, he dies to McGristle? That's how he goes?
Yeah.
Like, oh, man.
Yeah. So, Tyrannus had his new companion in Roddy. Man, how many companions
Roddy and the dog.
Roddy and the dog. Is that like 4 now? First it was Oogaloo. And then
Oogaloo and his
Kemfana.
Litter mate, mutt mate, whatever that.
Right, yeah, there was like litter mate.
Two of them. Yeah. And
then Karok and now Roddy.
Yep.
So many of them. So having no desire to fight Drizzt again, Tyrannus managed to convince Roddy that the Drow was killed by a warg. You know, something that did take a little convincing. And then together they rode off into the sunset. It said that they went off to the west, like at the end of the day. So they're going off into the sunset.
I like it.
Drizzt continued, moving back to Mushi's Grove here, Drizzt continued his training in Mushi's Grove that summer. He learned much of what it means to be a ranger, from learning the species within the forest to how to gather clues that Mieliki sets before him. Drizzt was tasked by Montolio with petting a deer, but ultimately failed at the challenge because he read the air currents of the region incorrectly. Meanwhile, Montolio... Well, I mean, right? That's...
Yes. I'm just laughing at the interaction here coming up between him and Montolio, where Montolio, being that little snark he is like, yeah, no, you didn't hear the hawk? What's up?
Yeah, exactly, because, like, Montolio, he sneaks up to the deer, gives it a pat on the rump, and then, you know, the deer bolts off, and then Montolio goes on to lecture the Drow about how he needs to observe the terrain from above, like a bird would, And he's like,
Right.
but I can't fly. And he's like, well, then look at the movements of the birds. That there was a hawk up there, and like, and Drizzt's only thought was how impossible it would be to notice something as minute as a hawk's flight pattern. And hold on,
I imagine his jaw was open while Montolio's
yeah.
telling him, looking at this hawk, like, "Are you serious?" Like,
Yeah. And yeah, like his jaw is hanging, and he's just like, hold on. How did Montolio even know the hawk was there? And comes out and says, Hooter told you of the wind and told you of the hawk. And Montolio is just like, he's like, yeah, you got me, right? He couldn't help but laugh at how right Drizzt was. He passed today's actual task, which was to trust your own knowledge and dispute claims that go against your own conclusions. Which is what we saw with Falcon Hand and Roddy, right? The back and forth between them. Roddy is just like, this is what I see. It's the scimitar. The Drow killed the family, all that, and Dove's going by like, no, it's this and that and this, and she's just challenging him and
right, trusting what she sees. I
right,
like that.
exactly. Yeah,
That's good. I would have never like made that cross. I like that.
yeah. The summer went on, and Montolio's teachings slowed. Drizzt was knowledgeable enough to go out and learn on his own. Montolio seemed to become slow physically, as well as old age caught up with him. And then he breaks the question. What are your plans? He asked Drizzt. And Drizzt avoided the question, but Montolio was persistent. Drizzt replied that he was going to stay with Montolio, then remain in the forest after he passes. Montolio wouldn't allow it. There's a wide world out there, my friend, full of pain, but filled with joy as well. The former keeps you on the path of growth, and the latter makes the journey tolerable. I just loved that. I had to include that quote.
It is, I mean, and it's such an amazing point of view when you consider the fact that Drizzt is probably just as old as Mushi in reality. Except in maturity, Montolio has lived his entire life. And he's looking at life with this perspective that Drizzt is unable to see because he's like, bro, there's a whole world out there. Yes, ups and downs and ins and outs and pain and joy. And Drizzt is just like, it's like much more naive, really.
Right.
Like, than unable to catch the scope. Even though, like I said, like they're basically, I believe, around the same age because, like I don't know exactly how it lays out what Montolio is to Drizzt, but somewhere close to each other.
Yeah. No, totally. They would be, at least within 10 or 20 years, I would think.
Yeah.
Drizzt agreed to consider leaving the grove and seeking adventure when Mushi was no more. And then the months went on. On one winter night, Drizzt returned to the grove with Guinevere to find Mushi's body slowly getting colder in the infrared spectrum. Montolio lived a long, happy life and died with a smile on his face. It was a tough few days for Drizzt, filled with tears. Tears not for Mushi, but for Drizzt's own loss. Drizzt stayed in the grove for the winter, but the spring brings new life. And with new life comes new adventures. Drizzt packed up a few belongings and set out toward the wide world of pains and joys.
I like that last paragraph. That's good.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. It's because it's like that very nice, like tie-up perspective, because it's exactly what it was. I like it.
All I did was summarize Salvatore's writing. All right. We're already going long, so let's go ahead and jump into the next portion of this episode, the dim light reel.
The dim light reel is where I'm just playing. The dim light reel is where we cast darkness on our favorite parts of this week and dim light all of our favorite characters, events, descriptions, and more. Now, for me, my dim light looks at the interaction between the Orc King Grawl and Roddy McGristle. I found this exchange to be entertaining, as Roddy tended to actually interact more like an orc than a human. So Roddy comes up a path toward the cave on King Grawl, and he's under the yellow, watchful gaze of hundreds of orcs in the camp. Roddy's found out where his nemesis, the Drow, is, and the only way that he can strike at him is to make a deal with the orcs, to enlist the help of King Grawl and his band. The orcs are rude, unkempt, taking every chance to showcase their sheer number, size, and dominance over Roddy. But he knew that their confidence came directly from their numbers, and not much else.
Right.
And Roddy is finally brought before the Orc King, and he actually imitates their speech and body language extremely well, demanding King Grawl pay for information. But Grawl didn't become king by giving things away. He demanded information now, and if it was good, McGristle could live. Payment enough.
Man, he should have saw that coming.
Right? Well, he kind of did, he says, right? Roddy knows he has no leverage, but he didn't really come here expecting to make coin. He told Growl that the Drow in his territory, and, well, he's shocked to find out that the king already knew that. Then why does Drow live? Roddy blurted. Growl kept up a solid face of deception by explaining that his scouts couldn't find the Drow. And that was true. They couldn't. That didn't mean, however, that Growl didn't know where Drizzt was. I have found him, Roddy roared, and the orcs began to jump around and cry out in hungry glee. Grawl looked out among the crowd for the red-robed orc shaman. This was a critical part of the plan that Grawl was putting into motion. The shaman considered Montolio to be an omen of bad magic, and the shaman carried a lot of weight with the orc army. Allying with the Drow would allow the excuse that Grawl desired to receive the blessing of Grumsh and invade Mushi's Grove. Speak, the Orc King shouted. The Drow is with the Ranger, Roddy replied. He sits in the Blind Ranger's grove, Roddy roared, expecting the crowd's momentum to continue. But the mention of the Blind Ranger really kind of killed the mood, and all of the common orcs just kind of turned to the shaman for guidance. Grawl seized the moment as Roddy cried out for them to go and get the ranger. Was it the Blind Ranger who killed the giant? He asked slyly. And helped the Drow kill me fighters? Roddy didn't know what was going on, but he not the smartest guy. He is clever and quick to catch on. It was. The Drow and the Ranger plot against ye all. Ye must bash and smash them before they come and bash yourselves. The Ranger will be bringing his animals. And elveses, lots and lots of elveses. and dwarveses, too, against Grawl. Tensions rose, and the silence was palpable until the red-robed shaman orc spoke. He who watches must bless the attack on the new moon.
Mm-hmm.
And in this dim light, we're shown the cunning side of King Grawl, and I really don't think that that's the kind of trait most people would associate with an orc.
Right.
But this insight into the character shows the character of the Orc King, as he's willing to use a human outsider and a few coins to weave a narrative that would whip his base up into a frenzy of war and force his religious advisor to give the blessing of their deity. A clever orc is a very intimidating opponent. From the other's perspective, I thought it was neat to see Roddy in his element, right? Because every time he's been around humans, it's stressed that he's a mountain man. That he's uncouth, a little rough around the edges.
A little.
But when he goes, just a touch. But when he goes among the orcs, he almost has to step it up a little bit in order to be considered among equals, right? Or step it down a little bit, I guess you'd say. They don't really consider him an equal, but he definitely seemed more at home with them than he ever did with the people of Maldabar.
Yeah, he totally did. And he knows their ways enough. He knows their language. So it's how much has he been dealing with the orcs in the past?
Living in the mountains, probably a good bit.
Right. Well, I'm part of me can't help but think, okay, so is he also partially responsible for the attacks on the caravans?
Interesting.
Right. And setting up bounties for things that he's done or something, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, I didn't even think about that. But yeah, would he have played any kind of part? Because he knew where Growl was. Right. He would know how to profit off that. And he is definitely a slimy kind of dude.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. That's where my mind went with that when I realized how, quote, friendly he is with the orcs.
Right.
Awesome. All right, my dim light for this part of the book is basically the entire second half of chapter 19. Nice. You know, just that whole thing. Separate Ways told us that Drizzt and Montolio were going to part ways, and I knew that Montolio was a pretty old for a human, but man, this chapter had me in tears by the end, Jeffrey. You know, I'm thinking like Separate Ways. I'm just like, okay, like Drizzt leaves. Drizzt leaves because he's putting Mushi in danger, and you know he leaves because, you know, doesn't want him to get hurt. I just was not prepared for this. In Mushi's Grove over the summer, Drizzt has his final lessons with Montolio. Like I said, sneaking up and setting hands on a deer. Of course, Drizzt fails at first, like I was saying, but within a 10-day, Drizzt manages to place a hand on a doe and her fawn, and he was simply elated at his success.
I'd be pretty happy to pet a deer, too.
To the point where Montolio can see it, basically, you know? Like, he says, like, he can see just how excited he is. Then the mood of the chapter drastically shifted. Montolio asks a question that hits Drizzt hard. What are your plans? Of course, Montolio is referring to when he passes. Jeffrey, no one likes being on the receiving end of these conversations. At least I don't, you know? Like, Drizzt did something I would totally do in his situation. He tried to change the subject. Like I can relate to this all too well. My parents are now in their lower 70s. And my dad, being my dad, will often start a conversation with, if something were ever to happen to me, you know, and then he usually goes on to like talk about how his water heater works or how to plug in the generator or how to open up his safe and all. It's like, are these important things? I mean, I guess, but it just makes me uncomfortable to talk about that and think about that. So
I prefer to get all of that information Nicolas Cage style in National Treasure. You just lead me on a treasure hunt to all the important things.
Exactly. Let's do that. You know. So yeah, I could feel Drizzt just squirming in his seat during this conversation. Drizzt replies that he'll stay with Montolio, and now we see how the long life of an elf can be a curse. Of course, Drizzt is going to outlive Montolio. With a life expectancy of 500 plus years, he would even outlive Montolio's great-great-grandchildren if he had them, you know?
Yeah.
And so Drizzt concludes that, okay, well, I'll just remain here then. And Montolio just is not having it. He knows that Drizzt is much more skilled than just being a hermit ranger in a forest. He replies with such a beautiful quote that I said earlier. There is a wide world out there, my friend, full of pain, but filled with joy as well. The former keeps you on the path of growth, and the latter makes the journey tolerable. It's just so profound. I love it.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy too when you take into account that Drizzt looks at this grove as the promise of everything he's never had. Montolio knows this grove is his ending place, right? Because he talks about it where he came out here basically to die. And then he went on and did more than everything, all those cool things, but he came out here to die. And Drizzt is like, I'll just stay here. And he's like aghast kind of, I think, like, no,
for 500 years, no, go live your life.
Yeah, like you're not here to die. Like that's what this place is for. You go frolic, be like the deer or something, you know? Like, jeez.
Yeah. Drizzt eventually agrees to consider moving out once Montolio passes. Then we cut to the winter and the first snowfall. I knew exactly what was happening right here, right away. As soon as I heard the first snowfall of the winter, I'm like, oh no. I was terrified to read on, Jeffrey. I know I've said on here before that when I read, I paint a picture in my mind of the scene. It's like playing like a movie in my head, right?
I'm hearing music in my ears right now, and there's no music. Yeah, because you're talking about this, and I'm like, man, that's where like the music would turn very somber, and you'd be like,
right, exactly. No, yeah, and my brain will put that in too, you know, and it's really weird to like talk about because it's like, I don't know if everyone else is that way, but my brain just kind of like fills in these gaps to make it play like award-winning movie, The scene that Drizzt walks back to is just etched in my head now because, again, I'm just like playing this movie, and we have this low campfire, Hooter sitting still on a branch, Guinevere sitting somberly by the fire, Drizzt slowly approaching, whispering, "Mushi?" He looks and watches the heat leave the ranger's smiling face, and just, oh my word, Jeffrey. Salvatore does such a great job putting together a somber, yet joyful. It's meant to be like joyful, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
it's hard to see it that way, but
yes,
it's
I
sort
think
of
I know
like,
what you're going for. I agree with you.
it's celebrating his, like, Montolio lived a long life as a
Right.
ranger. He died the way that, I don't know, he's proud to die just of old
That's a
age.
beautiful scene, like the way you paint it like that. Like, if we have anybody who listens to this, and you guys have any artistic talent, you want to go
Oh,
ahead and
man.
etch out what Justin wrote, right? Look on my YouTube, right, that you're probably going to see sometime with me and Justin here. I got a big old white wall behind me.
Oh, man.
Oh yeah, no, and if you would actually draw that out with Mushi and the owl and everything, like I would screen print that and
Oh,
hang that
jeez.
behind me on the wall. Just saying.
That'd be
That
amazing.
sounds gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. It does. So
That was a
yeah,
good one.
that whole scene just had me tearing up so much that I could barely read the page. Luckily, like, I was also listening to it via audiobook,
Right.
but like I read and listen to it at the same time, and yeah, I couldn't even read the words anymore. But just a beautiful, beautiful moment. Terribly sad, but I get how it's also like a happy moment for him. But yeah. All right. I almost started crying just talking about it. Let's move on. Let's go dungeon delving. What do you say?
Well, I say that the Dungeon Delve is the part of the show where we link this week's reading with our favorite tabletop role-playing game.
Whoop, whoop.
My Dungeon Delve is perception, active versus passive, and what that means. It was definitely inspired by the beginning of the chapter and how Mushi was able to get the best of Drizzt even though he's blind.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yep.
In 5e, passive perception is what your character is generally aware of while being around in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, Drizzt is aware that Mushi's blind. It's what he sees, right? It's his passive perception. He can see that. This is determined by adding your perception score to 10. This doesn't involve a rolling of the dice. It's just the static score. If you're
Close.
proficient in perception, then don't forget to add the modifier in as well. Okay?
Close. Passive perception? Passive perception is 10 plus your perception modifier, not score. Is that?
Oh, did I say score?
Yeah.
I did mean modifier.
I figured, but I just wanted to make that clear because we're going to get angry emails, Jeffrey.
I love those. You guys send those all to somebody else. Passive perception could pick up things in your background of your character's life. Yeah, do you have a member of a party who's a pickpocket? Maybe you'd notice something that draws your attention toward them, something that seems off or gives you like the willies, right?
Right.
Is there someone trying to sneak by the party while you're in town? I once had a character with an extremely high passive perception as a druid, and I feel like it really helped keep the DM from springing some surprises on the party.
Man, you ruined all the surprises, Jeffrey.
Man, what was it? I think my 16 was at my passive
It
perception.
was at least
kinda
16.
silly.
I want to say it was like 18. It was nuts.
I feel like rolling put me at a disadvantage every time.
Right. It did.
Which brings us to active perception, right? So active perception is what your character notices when they are actively looking for it. They would be asked to make a perception check, which means you would take your d20 and give it a toss. You would add your wisdom modifier to the outcome and proficiency if needed or applicable. Right? This could be used when you're keeping an eye out to scout ahead, or perhaps you're listening for some distant sounds, right? Or maybe, I don't know, looking for traps that your dungeon master's discretion. These could all trigger perception checks. Knowing the difference between active and passive perception won't necessarily make or break the game, but it can help with a more seamless transition of story and gameplay. for me, I feel like this is more kind of like a DM thing than a player thing because, when you get the books, they'll break down some events that may or may not impact the party based on their passive perception scores. Who might notice an impending ambush? Can I do something without the characters noticing?
Right.
These checks do a great job of engaging your players and also adding a little bit of customization to the events. But what happens is ultimately up to the roll.
Oh yeah, totally. Now the when you were mentioning the beginning of this part, was that the shoot the time? Are you referring to the time when they're like walking through the woods and Mushi's just like birch and throws a knife into the birch tree?
Well, yeah, this one starts out right because he's
Yeah,
talking about
yeah.
the fight they just had, though, where like Drizzt had gotten beaten by Mushi because he thought Mushi was blind,
Right. That's right. Yeah,
and
that's right.
Mushi's
That's an
just kind of
extension of
lecturing
that.
him
Right.
like, "Hey, don't you dare try to like give me pity.
Yep.
Like, don't
Yeah.
you dare have the gall to assume that you're going to beat me." Because he's like, "I didn't." He's like, "Yeah, you did. Because there's no other reason you're going to
Right.
jump flip over top of me like that. Like you
Right.
wouldn't do that to a normal enemy, but you assume because I'm blind you're going to do." And he was like offended,
Yeah.
and I was like,
Yeah.
"Man, that's kind of crazy."
Uh-huh. I
But
love
that's what
that
made me
moment
think,
though.
because it's like, did you're as the blind individual, his active perception would be true, it would allows him to pass all these checks of where's Drizzt, what's the attack, what's going on. Where earlier we saw Drizzt fight blind within the sphere of darkness against Zachnafane and
Uh-huh.
kind of train from a similar perspective,
Right.
but that gave him a false confidence coming into Mushi's actual blindness.
Right. Yep. Awesome. Okay, your dungeon delve leads very well into mine. I want to talk about traps because, oh man, there were so many great traps in the Battle of Mushi's Grove.
Yes.
So many that I just wanted to take a look at, just a couple of them from this chapter, and
Excellent.
get you some stat blocks for them too. So the hunting trap, like those, just the what do you call them? Like bear traps, but
Hmm.
hunting traps are probably like smaller for like rabbits, groundhogs, whatever, smaller game, right? That you can find in the player's handbook. It's actually an item that you can purchase, like from like a general store. A hunting trap. It's not a trap that a DM would set necessarily.
Oh, okay. Right.
Right. Yeah. So this is actually a pretty simple trap that requires a DC 13 Dex save when triggered. On a fail, it does 1d4 piercing damage, and the creature can only move about 3 feet in any direction unless
Ah,
it's able
boo.
to escape. And then to escape, the creature needs to succeed on a 13 strength save, whether that's pulling the stake out of the ground and running off with the trap still on it, or if it's like a humanoid that's stuck in it and they're disengaging it, it's going to be a strength save either way. And then if you fail that strength save, the creature's going to end up taking another 1d, or just 1 piercing damage. Not another 1d4, just 1. So this seems like a pretty simple trap for a DM to use on a party. Like, it's not going to do much, right? So, DMs out there, don't be afraid to scale this up, you know? No, seriously.
No, I'm laughing because of Tool Time with Tim Taylor. I'm picturing you be like, you could take this trap and, and just, you know what I mean? Make it a little bigger, make it a little
Yeah.
faster.
Well, yeah, totally. Well, that's what you're doing, right? You just
Yeah.
make it bigger. And then it's just like, okay, instead of a little hunting trap for a rabbit, now it's a bear trap. Let's say the dex save is instead a DC 16 to avoid it. Possibly 1d10, if not more, piercing damage if caught, right?
What if it mauls you and you're unable, like, broken leg,
Well,
he
yeah,
has your
exactly.
speed or something? Ah,
Right. Like, just like the Quickling, just like Tophanis.
yeah.
So that's one trap. That can be found on page 152 of the player's handbook. If you guys have your handbook. So I'm not going to put that one on the Discord, but the next one I will. So what about these trees that Montoya was setting up? I had to read what he was doing a couple times before I was able to finally put together my own interpretation of it. I don't know if this is completely accurate or not. But like, how exactly were these traps set? How are they doing damage? Well, in chapter 17, Montolio is wearing a harness and attaches himself to the top of a pine tree. He jumps down, bending the top of the tree down toward the ground, very Wile E. Coyote. And that's going to produce a lot of elastic potential energy. That's the physics teacher coming out in me, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of energy stored in that system.
One may say, what, kinetic? Or?
Well, while he's moving, it's kinetic, right? Once it's stationary,
okay, yeah.
then it's potential, elastic potential. Once he hits the ground, he quickly ties off the top of the tree down on the ground through some roots to hold it in place. Okay? He arranges a number of trees to lift in unison. I imagine that it's like two trees, like a pair of trees together, another pair of trees together, another pair of trees together, one on either side, because then he has this menacing grid of rope in between the two trees with a mess of knives tangled in it. And I just imagine this as a net trap that would catch a victim and pick him up, right? Just like you would see in like a, I don't know, like a old jungle adventuring movie, like or like a Indiana Jones type thing. Just a net that picks you up, right? But instead, we have these knives all jumbled up in there that would pierce the victim a bunch of times as it lifts them up, right? I mean, that's how I imagined it.
Well, doesn't it throw the knives, like sling the knives out,
well,
like
that's
a shotgun blast?
It sounded like that as well. So I don't know. I don't know. But in chapter 17, it sounded more like this. But then during the battle, it sounded like the knives were like flying out. So this is the way I interpreted it. If someone has another interpretation, make a stat block and share it with us. All right. But talk about gruesome. This thing is just like, ugh. So
I love that what you named it. This is great. Go ahead.
So I threw together a little stat block of what you could possibly use in a session. Feel free to use it or modify it in any way to suit your campaign. I'll post it on the Discord, but here's the basic idea. I called it Montolio's Carnivorous Conifer Trap. Because it's conifers, pine trees are conifers.
Coniferous tree. I like it. I like it.
So this is a mechanical trap. It consists of a net, just like I described, right? Intertwined knives or daggers throughout. When the tripwire is activated, the bent over trees on either side of the trap are released, and the tree tops fly back up to their natural position, capturing the victim in the gruesome net. Usually hidden under a thin pile of leaves or grass, an unsuspecting creature only spots the trap with a DC 15 perception check. If the tripwire is activated, any creature within the 10 by 10 area are caught by the trap, taking, I said 5d4 piercing damage, because I imagine like 5 daggers all stabbing at the same time, and daggers are 1d4 damage.
Nice.
And then they're also lifted 10 feet into the air. Just for a little bonus here, I added the net has an AC of 10 and 20 hit points, but a creature that falls from a cut trap will take 1d6 falling damage, as well as 1d4 piercing damage, because, I mean, perhaps they fall on a knife or something.
Right, or get caught by another knife coming out of it as they fall out.
Oh, man. Oh, that sounds terrible. So I'm going to post that on the Discord. Again, feel free to use it in your campaigns. Change it up as you feel.
And if you do, please feel free to let us know how it went, how they liked it, what happened to people. Yes, please.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yes.
All right. Hey, that wasn't too bad, Jeffrey. We're only like at an hour and 5 minutes. That's actually not too bad. But that is the end of this episode. So thank you all for listening. Remember that if you like the show, give us a 5-star rating. Also, make sure you're getting the most out of this podcast. Pick up a copy of the book and read along with us. Unless, I mean, I'm just going to throw a shout out here. This is not scripted, Jeffrey, so I'm just going to go off of here real quick. It came to my attention that a coworker of mine is listening to this podcast, and he is a somewhat chaotic type person. Robert, I love you. You're awesome. You're chaotic. You know that. And he is specifically choosing not to read the book. He just listens to the podcast.
Ironic.
That's all. Yeah, that's what he wants
But
to
hey,
do. And
thank you for listening. And if
yeah,
you're
totally.
YouTube,
No, that's exactly.
waving
Hey, if you don't want to read along, we'll give you the Drizzt of it, and you know, there you go.
clue you into the dim lights.
Absolutely. So
That's literally what we do.
but hey, if you want to read it and you don't have time to read it, consider the audiobook. Listen to it during your commute, at work, at the gym, or wherever. When you've read the next part, shoot us an email at drizztdoneright@gmail.com or log on to our Drizztcord to join in on the discussion there. Remember, we would love to hear from you.
As we come towards the end of the episode, we wrap everything up. Just want to take a moment to remind you all that if you'd ever like to make any kind of donation to the show, we do have a link in the episode description that says support this podcast. Every little bit definitely helps. This has been such a fun journey so far, and we appreciate all of you for coming along with us. It's never easy to say goodbye, so maybe I'll say farewell. Till we get together the next time, play fair and be well.